Hello and welcome to Future Squared. Stephen Hawking once said that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, so let's adapt. My name is Steve Glaveski, and each week I'll bring you conversations with preeminent thought leaders from a variety of fields to help you think in a multidisciplinary way, keep goals in your professional and personal life, and better navigate what is fast becoming a brave, new world. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation accelerator that works with organizations to unlock their people's latent potential to create more impact for humanity and lead more fulfilling lives. If you need help driving your organization's innovation strategy, visit collectivecampus.io. And without further ado,
come with me if you want to live.
And, it's difficult, too, comparing yourself to someone when, you take a photo of yourself, you're taking one photo, you don't have professional hair and makeup, you don't, it hasn't been edited and filtered. And before an influencer posts something, she probably took 300 photos and her hair and makeup were done. And she spent hours picking an outfit and scouting the location and doing the lighting. And then she's, editing the photo. Like, it's the same as when you look at a magazine. That so much work goes into creating this photo that you really shouldn't feel like you're comparing yourself to this person, because your photo, the type of photo you take and the type of photo they take are not the same.
welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 288 with Brittany Hennesy. Brittany is the author of Influencer, Building Your Personal Brand in the Age of Social Media. She's also the first ever Senior Director of Influencer Strategy and Talent Partnerships for Hearst Magazine's digital media, and she's the co-founder of Carbon. In 2007, after graduating from university with a degree in journalism, Brittany created ChiChi212.com, which was nominated by Paper Magazine for Best Nightlife Blog, and she became an influencer for Bacardi, Pop Chips, Svedka, and The Gap. When she was flown to Germany as the North American ambassador for Nivea, just to hang out with Rihanna on a cruise ship and tweet about it, she knew it was time to make the switch from journalism to social media. Brittany has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Entrepreneur, Business of Fashion, Digiday, Business Insider, Cosmopolitan, Glossy, Girlboss, Mobile Marketer, Al Jazeera, and many, many more. In this episode, we explored the world of influencers. You can expect to learn 1, what an influencer is, why influencers are important, and why you should consider becoming or leveraging influencers. 2, how to build your community and create great content. And 3, the dark side of social media, how to grow your online persona without becoming addicted to technology, depressed, or neglecting to invest in your real life. With that, I bring you Brittany Hennesy. Welcome to the show, Brittany.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and you're joining me all the way from Westchester, New York.
I am. It's really, you can just do New York City though, because nobody knows. So many people don't know where Westchester is.
Yeah, but I thought I'd just try and provide a little bit more identity around where you're from. If I just say New York City, it's just, NYC. There's another guest from NYC, whereas Westchester, now my audience is totally going to remember you, and they're going to have a reference point, because prior to this, maybe they didn't, but now when they hear Westchester, they're going to think Brittany Hennesy from the Future Squared podcast. So I'm doing something for Westchester here. It's my little bit for the town.
I love it.
So it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And before we get into it, I mean, our audience may not be familiar with who Brittany Hennesy is. And I know you're doing a bit of work across a few different organizations. I mean, you're the co-founder of Carbon. You work over at Hearst, and you're an advisor at a number of organizations, including Me Token, which is doing some pretty exciting things in the blockchain related space. But maybe if you can just tell our audience, or give our audience the 2,000-foot view of who Brittany Hennesy is, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. So I have a background in journalism. That's what I majored in college at Rutgers University. Mm-hmm. Then spent a lot of time doing PR, which led me to starting my own blog in 2007. which seems like a really long time.
Yeah. Was that on like Blogger or?
Yeah. Oh, I did. It was a nightlife and events blog. So I went to a lot of parties. I went to Fashion Week, that sort of thing. And it led me to going to Germany as an ambassador for Nivea for their 100th anniversary and spending some time with Rihanna on a cruise ship. And I had to tweet about it. And so that's when I realized like that was the first time someone had done like a really big activation that I was involved with for influencer marketing. And I realized this is going to be a big trend in the marketing space. And so I started to move more into social media and influencer marketing. And since then, I've really done a lot of work with pretty much any brand you're familiar with. Between Horizon and Hearst, I've done all of the beauty brands, the fashion brand, the retail stores, travel, fitness, food, entertainment. And it's been a really exciting ride. And I realized there was a lot of resources for brands, not so many resources for influencers who were trying to be better partners in the space. And that's what led me to write this book.
Fantastic. And we'll get to the book in a second. In that book, you do tell the story of, aside from partying with Rihanna, cutting a $100,000 check for an influencer to shoot 3 YouTube videos.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories. And, it was for beauty, and she was doing 3 tutorials for us. And there was, she had a decent follower count, but the contract was pretty intense. And that's the kind of salary you can get as a beauty influencer. And so it is no longer the largest check I have written, but it is the largest non-celebrity check I have written.
Yeah. And that's one of the distinctions you make in your book, that an influencer isn't necessarily just a celebrity who has, by virtue of being a celebrity, a big following, but it could be just your everyday content creator working from home who just builds their own following over time. And it could be that they themselves have 500,000 to over 1 million followers.
Yeah, I think that's a big misconception. Every time people hear the word influencer, they always think Kim Kardashian. When people write about influencers, they always mention Kim Kardashian and, Kylie Jenner and Gigi Hadid and all of these people who are influencers because they influence people, but they're celebrities, and they can jump on any platform at any point in time and rack up millions of followers because they're famous offline. When I'm talking about influencers, and when most of marketing is talking about it, we're talking about content creators. And these are people who are many and sometimes not so many media brands that usually start with one person in a basement blogging and then turn into these Instagram channels and YouTube channels that brands love to work with because they have a really loyal and engaged audience and they make really great content. But that's very different than being a Kim Kardashian. Yeah.
So I guess when we're talking about content creators, we're talking bloggers, we're talking vloggers, experts, as you put it in your book. And that's essentially the crux of it. But then your book also goes into what you call lifecasters. So people like, say, entrepreneurs who want to broadcast their story to the world and go behind the scenes on Instagram and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately your book focuses mostly on those content creators.
Yeah, people really think about influencer marketing a lot of times in black and white terms, which is either you're some huge celebrity or you're some huge blogger. And they don't realize that there's so many influencers in between there, which are, you have like dancers like Isabella and Katie Boren, who are their professional ballet dancers. And between them, I think they have 200, 300,000 followers. And I've worked with pilots who have 500,000 followers, and they're flying around and just showing you the different things they see at their job. And so, it doesn't have to be something as curated as, an Instagram fashion star who takes does all these photo shoots of these outfits. Plenty of times it is just people who live pretty exciting lives, and you're just happy to follow what they're doing because it's inspiring.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny you said pilot. I was at a conference yesterday on innovation, and one of the speakers was talking about Tinder for whatever reason. And he mentioned that the number one swipe right profile on Tinder was pilot, followed closely by entrepreneur. So there you go. I can see why Instagram has some pilots may have a big following. It's just one of those types of professions. But Your book, like you mentioned, it's called Influence, Building Your Personal Brand in the Age of Social Media. It came out a few months ago now, and it's all about becoming a professional influencer without being a Kardashian. But you know, the word influencer gets thrown around a lot, and people out there are aspiring to become influencers. But I mean, why would I want to become an influencer in the first place, Brittany?
So becoming an influencer is not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I personally don't want to be this modern version of an influencer because it really is a lot. It is a lot more work than people think, and you really have to be dedicated to it. But if you are, you know, if you're someone who loves fashion, parenting, and you're spending a lot of time writing about these things anyway, you know, or posting photos about your outfits, it makes a lot of sense to figure out how to monetize that. So that's one way if you're going the traditional content creator route. For a lot of people in entertainment, their careers are dependent on their Instagram numbers now, which is crazy, but it's true. So people like models, comedians, dancers, actresses, you know, a lot of times I think certain Broadway shows, you can't even get an audition unless you have 50,000 followers. And that's happening with modeling agencies too. And they're really looking for marketing outlets. And, you know, even in music, lots of times you have to have a built-in fan base before a record label will sign you now. And those people are really big on YouTube. So one, it can really help. So two, it can really help boost your professional career. And then three, you know, lots of times you might be an entrepreneur and you have a business and you're trying to put your business out there, and it helps to elevate yourself as a public figure. And then you end up being, you know, a little bit of an influencer, even if you're, you know, even if you work at a big company, you could, like an editor or a designer or something like that, you could end up picking up a lot of followers who care about your opinion. And when you recommend something, they are willing to try it. And that sort of audience conversion is what makes someone an influencer. So those are the three reasons. And then, you know, lots of people want to become an influencer so they can make a lot of money and quit their corporate 9-to-5, which I think is the most common reason.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I mean, even from my own experience on a couple of those fronts, not necessarily in entertainment, but in terms of getting a book deal with a big publisher like Wiley, on the back of hosting a podcast and building, you know, a small but decent Twitter following. That's one thing that book publishers I know always look for. Have you got a platform that, you know, you can take this message and share it with the world? And then also running a business, having quite a few inbound leads as a result of, say, people listening to the podcast and saying, hey, I've been listening to your podcast for a few months, thought I'd reach out. We've got this problem. We're hoping your organization could help us. So I can definitely vouch for that. And that's two of the more common reasons I see. But then you also see, like you said, a lot of people out there who just want to make a life, quit their job and just make a life of being this online personality.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, it's fun. That's the other thing. If it's something you're really passionate about, you know, this is the sort of job that can really not feel like work. And, you know, if you're a fashion influencer, you spend your days styling clothes, checking out preview collections. Food influencers get to eat a lot. Beauty influencers are helping, you know, a lot of people figure out, you know, different looks. So that's really the most important thing, is that whatever you decide to be an influencer in, you're very passionate about it, because it is there's a lot that goes into it, from planning your event and, you know, really staying on top of the trends in whatever your field is. And if it's not something you really love, you're going to hate it because it's hard. And you don't make a lot of money in influencer marketing until you get a lucky break. And lots of times that break can take 6 months, a year, multiple years. You never know when it will come. So what needs to be driving you is your love for the work and not the paycheck that you think will come at some point.
Yeah. And I think that's a fantastic point. And it also correlates, or there's parallels between that and pretty much any pursuit worth doing, like anything difficult, whether you want to be an actor, whether you want to be an athlete, whether you want to be an entrepreneur, there's going to be that period of rolling that big, heavy boulder up the hill. And you're not even sure whether you'll ever get to the top of the hill. And that's the thing that's kind of on the back of your mind. So unless you really just enjoy what you do and you really align with it, then you're just going to give up before you get there.
Absolutely. Influencers, there's a lot of influencer burnout. And I don't think people realize that this is a thing. And it's people who are just pushing, and maybe they got into it for the wrong reasons. Maybe, they're doing something that's against their skill set. It's just really hard. And a lot of people, if that break doesn't come early on, they do give up. And then, they were once attempting to be influencers and now they're not. And so it really can be something difficult that you have to love it. That's why anyone who hits 1 million followers or 500,000 or even 100,000, they really love it, because it's a lot of work to get to that number, especially when you're doing it alone.
Yeah. And I wanted to explore influencer burnout a little bit later, but first I'd love to explore the concept of building that community. You mentioned with musicians, initially record labels and whatnot won't really look at them unless they have a big following online already. And that aligns with what online marketing guru Neil Patel told me when he was on the show, when he said, first you have to build your community, then you can sell to them. So in respect to building that community, I mean, how does one even go about identifying the right audience or finding their tribe online? Because I guess what a lot of people do by accident is they try to be everything to everyone rather than really honing in on their own particular tribe who's going to resonate with their message. So, I mean, what's the first thing people should do when it comes to building that community?
I mean, the first thing is what you mentioned, is figuring out who you are and what you're offering. And, lots of times, especially in influencer marketing, people will tend to copy something that looks popular, but it's contrived and as quote unquote fake as Instagram is, it is real in the sense that for most of the influencers, because I know quite a few of them personally, this is who they really are. And so if you're a very bright and bubbly person, but you're trying to do the moody fashion influencer because that seems popular, it's not something that's going to work really well for you, because, especially if you're trying to be a professional influencer, it's a lifestyle. It's not something you do, because if your whole theme is, brightly colored, everything in your closet is brightly colored. Your home is probably brightly colored. Like this is your life. And so you really have to figure out who you are. What are you trying to offer? The market is so saturated right now. There are so many influencers. Like, what makes you different? And I think once you figure that out and you start putting that out there, other people that resonates with them, they'll come find you. And so, you use the standard hashtag, those are the ways you can get discovered, and telling everybody that you're, have a blog or an Instagram, and really doing the legwork, like the groundwork of getting yourself out there. But at the end of the day, when somebody finds you and they understand what makes you different, because that's what attracted them to you, they'll start to tell friends who will tell friends who will tell other friends. And that's how people grow. And, people also need to not worry so much about the number, because the follower count is important, but it all depends on your niche. If your influencer vertical is that, it's just makeup, well, millions and millions and millions of people love makeup. And so it would make sense that to be a true influencer in that space, you have to have a very high follower count. But if your niche is, being a vegan, like running a vegan family, and you're a mom and your whole thing is that your kids are also vegan, like if it's something that's much more specific, and there's a niche for everything. If it's something that's much more specific, you're not going to have millions of followers, because there aren't millions of people who that's going to resonate with. You might end up with 10,000, 100,000, and that could make you very, very influential in your niche, because that's a high number for how many people are available to follow you.
Yeah. And it also comes back to, what are you trying to get out of this? I mean, if you are, say, an entrepreneur and you're trying to just build your brand and get more sales, and you are selling to, say, small, or maybe you're selling to large organizations, and you have a captive audience of 1,000 executives from large companies, that may not sound like a big number if you're selling, say, makeup, but if each of those executives has the power to cut $100,000 check, then there's some pretty good numbers. So it really depends what your goals are, and then working backwards from there.
Absolutely. And that's something I tell influencers all the time. It also will help you figure out how to tailor your content, what opportunities to chase, what opportunities to pass on what brands you should work with. You have to figure out where you're going with this, because so many people are just, stumbling down the road, and then they end up really far from where they wanted to be because they never actually knew where that place was. So if you at some point want to have a clothing line, or if you want to become an actress, or if you want to launch, a type of service, those are things you should figure out beforehand. So as you said, you can work backwards and see how is building a community going to help you reach that ultimate goal.
Yeah. And then ultimately, like you said, being authentic is not only going to make it much easier for you, but it's going to help you avoid burnout, and it's going to help you relate to people more, because people tend to look through or can see through people that are being fake and just putting some make-believe foot forward. But if they can see that it's legitimately you, not only will you project a certain image that people resonate with online, but you're far more likely to play the long game that's required if you are being authentic.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's exhausting trying to be somebody else. And everyone can think back in high school where they were trying to be something that they weren't. And, those things, it's difficult. And then you end up, if you're trying to be somebody else, you end up, with brands contacting you who are actually not in alignment with what you like and what you believe. And you end up with influencers trying to collaborate with you who are not on brand for you. Because if you are really like, you love affordable clothing, but you try to do this really high fashion luxury Instagram, then you're not going to end up with Target and TJ Maxx. And if those are your favorite brands, that's a huge miss for you. And so I think, people just tend to think like, what is everybody else doing and what's going to, be popular and make me a lot of money. And then they end up having to make really hard decisions because they have a lot of opportunities that are not in line with their brand. And then they have to turn down a lot of money because it doesn't resonate with that. That's not a problem you want to have, because turning down a lot of money is really hard.
It is, definitely. And it's something that a lot of people struggle with when they try to reconcile their purpose and their passion with the realities of making money. But it's funny because I was listening to the Dave Rubin podcast recently, and I was a real big fan of his show, but he tends to wax lyrical about hair replenishing ointment. That's one of his sponsors. But the guy has never lost a strand of hair on his head. He's never been bald. So you're just like, dude, it's not like even remotely authentic. You're clearly just doing that for the money, right? And I actually got turned off the show, and I don't listen to it as often as I do just because of the ads. Even though I can fast forward, I'm well aware of that. But there's something about people aligning themselves with brands that you can tell they're just doing it for the money that just turns you off.
Absolutely. And I think, people always talk about influencers and they say, how can I influencer as being authentic? How do I know she's not just promoting this company for the money? That does happen with bad influencers. Like any other industry, there are people who are really good at what they do and really bad at what they do. But like you said, you don't listen to this person as much anymore. And influencers, especially YouTubers, bloggers, and Instagram stars, they cannot afford to lose their core audience for a campaign. Because at the end of the day, that's the fact that their audience trusts them, believes them, engages with their content. That's the reason why brands are hiring them in the first place. So if they go out and do a campaign that turns their audience off, they're going to lose a lot of their followers, which means one, their engagement rate goes down, their follower count goes down, which means the amount that they can charge goes down, and that their attractiveness to brands decreases. And now all of a sudden they can't get the same campaigns they could get before. And so there are influencers who will do a campaign just for the money, but for the most part, they will walk away from something that they know their audience won't like, because first and foremost, that's who their responsibility is to. And those people are the reason they're influencers in the first place, not just because they're providing a service to them, but because those people are the ones who make up that follower account that matters so much to brands.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And on people that are just getting into this space, a lot of people, the overwhelming majority of people don't really consider themselves creative, but creating content is core to building an audience online, creating great content that's shareable, that people like, that people look forward to seeing every day or hearing or whatever the case is. What advice do you have for people who perhaps want to build that personal brand online, but don't consider themselves really creative, great at writing blogs? What's the best the first thing they might be able to do to help build that confidence up?
Sure. You can teach yourself to take photos. all of these things. And I think, one of Heidi is the first influencer I profile in the book. And she said she couldn't write to save her life when she first started. And she was, her entire background was in business and she wanted to be a fashion blogger. And so she read a lot of books because she just loved it, but not enough to be considered an expert on it. So she read a lot of books. She took a lot of courses on how to write and specifically how to do style writing. And she really just worked at it. And now, she's a big influencer in the fashion space and has worked with a lot of the best brands. And it's something that she taught herself. The way you have to look at it is, when you go to college, whatever you're majoring in, you might have like a curiosity about it, but you don't really know anything. That's what college is for, to, learn philosophy and learn literature. And if you're in the sciences, to learn about all the formulas and the different experiments. And this is what you're learning. So, if you want to be a creator, it's just like trying to learn something to get a degree in college, and you have to learn the ropes of whatever it is you're doing. You have to practice. And when you don't understand something, you Google it. And then, you call on some people who maybe have that as an area of expertise and ask them for help. But that's a lot of, what happens there is you got to do the work. And you might not consider yourself a content creator now, but if you're creating content, that's exactly what you are.
Yeah. And one thing I like to do, not only in the podcasting domain, but most domains, is look at people who are really successful today. For example, it could be, say, Tim Ferriss in the podcasting domain, and then go back to episode number 1 and listen to what their podcast was like, what the interviewing was like, and compare it to where it is today, and just realize that even the world's biggest influencers started somewhere. They started with one follower. They started with, say, subpar skills, whether it's in the podcasting domain, whether it's in the blogging domain, whether it's in the vlogging domain, photography, whatever it is. But everybody starts somewhere, even the most influential, even the most prominent influencers in a particular domain today.
Absolutely. That's, something you have to tell people, especially when now and you're looking at so many people who have 1 million followers or something like that. And you're like, I can't get to that number. Every single person started with 0. Yep. That's just how it works. And it takes a long time, and it's a lot of, again, it's becoming an influencer is running a marathon, not sprinting. It takes a long time. And, at the end of the day, it's really worth it. And that's also one of those reasons why when these influencers who are huge, they get paid so much money and people tend to get a little upset. And I always say, for 8 years, she was working for free. So let her have, this moment where maybe she's making a little too much. You never want to overpay for something. But so many of these girls, their hard work finally started paying off in 2013, 14, 15, when brands really started giving them large amounts of money to do this work. And sure, it's a lot of money, but in their minds, some of them have been, influencers since 2008 and haven't made a penny in years. And so, for them, it's just catching up.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that shows up in all sorts of domains where people may have a little bit of resentment towards what they see as easy work, easy money, but they don't realize just how much time and effort went into it, and that overnight success story actually took about 7 years.
Yeah, it's the same thing with all social too. You really only see people's highlights. And so that's what's great and problematic about social media. But for a lot of these influencers, they maybe in order they quit their job to really take the leap, and maybe it didn't work out so well in the beginning, and they were struggling with their bills, or they were trying to do it while they were in school and it was difficult. A lot of these people have really great stories when you find out how they made the jump into becoming an influencer. And for so many of them, this is their full-time job. A lot of them have families, they have mortgages, and this is what they do for a living. And it's a lot less secure than working in a corporate environment where if you lose your job, there's an official process to try and find another one. If you don't make it as an influencer, there is no influencer backup. It's just you go and do something completely different. And so it's risky. It's risky, and they're out there riding the wave. And so it's admirable.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, there's a hell of a lot of them out there riding the wave, all trying to stand out. And are you familiar with Seth Godin's Purple Cow, Brittany?
Yes.
Yes. So, he tells the story of being in the car, driving along the countryside, and obviously the countryside is littered with cows everywhere. But then over the horizon, they see a purple cow. So they think, what the hell? They stop the car, jump out, take photos, take selfies with the purple cow, because the purple cow is memorable. It's remarkable. Now, there's a hell of a lot of noise in the online space. I mean, there's over 1 billion accounts on Instagram as of earlier this year. I mean, what do people do to be remarkable? I mean, we've talked about finding your niche. We've talked about creating content, but from your, through your expert eye, Brittany, I mean, what have you seen? What do the more prominent influencers do that others don't? I mean, how do they create remarkable content? Why are they remarkable?
Sometimes it really just is quality of content. Mm-hmm. And so in the book, one of the influencers is Alyssa Bossio, and her content is just stunning. Like, it doesn't matter how long I've been scrolling through Instagram. If I come across one of her photos, I have to stop and look at it because it really is that good. She does a lot of work editing it, and her photos, they look like art. They're very different than the original photo that gets taken because she filters them a lot, but that's the point. And they're beautiful. And she's a travel influencer and her stuff is really great. And then for some people, it's just, a lot of it is that they remind you of you. And that's same style as you, or a similar style, except they can dress better. And so there is some inspiration there, or they're going to all the places you wish you could go, or they have a certain parenting style. That's what I don't think it's so much what makes influencers stand out, because to be a good influencer in general, you have to have great content. You have to understand your audience, and, you need to be consistent. But really it ends up being, do people feel like you're their friend? And that's really what social media is doing, is making all these people your digital best friends or your inspirations. And can you connect with people on that level? And a lot of that is, do you respond to your comments? Do you respond to your DMs? Do people feel like they know you? And any influencer will tell you, people come up to them on the street all the time and just start talking to them. And they're like, who are you? But this person feels like they know them because they've been following them years and they know everything about them. And so it's actually kind of creepy when you think about it, because these people who you've never met think you're like their friend. But what makes these people good influencers?
Yeah. And I guess that's just part of the reality of the world we find ourselves in today. And I mean, talking about creating quality content, being consistent, finding your niche, and also just being relatable so people feel like your friend, they resonate with your message, where you're from, what you're about, your sense of style, and so on. So you've done all of that, but then, obviously creating the content is one thing, creating good content is one thing, but making that content is absolutely useless unless nobody sees it, right? So you talk about this in your book. So
That's right.
Can people do from a content distribution perspective when it comes to getting brands, sites, and people to notice you better, other than just, hashtag stuffing and things of that sort?
Sure. So that's, the hashtags is where you start. And then part of what you're doing, I think, when you're thinking about brands is, brands spend a lot of time Googling. There's all that we Google, and we use lots of technology to help us find influencers, because there just are so many at this point. It's impossible to know, everyone who's out there. I'm still discovering people, and I've been looking for influencers for more than 5 years. So you want to make sure that whatever your expertise is, that's laid out in your bio, and that your bio is search friendly, because when companies use these big platforms, they're keyword searching your bio for beauty or fitness or a city or something like that. And if I work with a lot of influencers and like coaching, and they'll say, oh, I'm like a vintage fashion blogger. And I'm like, really? Because your bio doesn't say anything about vintage or fashion. And they just can't even believe that. They're like, oh my God, I totally didn't even put that in my bio. And it's like, yeah, how is anybody supposed to find you if you're not telling them what you're doing? So I think there are some of those obvious things. And then there are, other things like the internet always does these roundups of best Instagram people who do this, 10 people you need to follow if you live in Portland, 50 of the top, Instagrams if you like food. There's all these sorts of things, 26 Latina beauty makeup people, there's all sorts of lists. And I think, one of the things I tell people to do is to look for you and then write the people who wrote those lists and say, hey, when you do another one of these, you should put me in it, and this is why. And I think that's how a lot of people actually end up on these lists. And if you can't, you should make your own list. Because when Brian is Googling top, vintage style influencers in Nashville, if you wrote that list and put yourself on it, and then also added a bunch of people who you follow and who are inspirational to you, the brand will find that list that you wrote, and now they know who you are. Yeah. And I have found many, many, many influencers through reading these lists, and lots of times they wrote these lists themselves. And so that's why I always say, if you're doing a countdown, don't put yourself last, which a lot of people tend to do, to be like, last but not least, I'm adding myself on this list. And it's like, that's crazy, because if I only need one or two and you did a top 10 and I find them in the first 5, I'll never even get to you.
Yeah.
Which, because you put yourself last, you put yourself first.
Yeah, a little less humility, I think, is required when building those lists. And also, the fact that you might put together a list of, say, top 50 fashion influencers, and then you could just go on and email, say, that fashion influencer or their representative or whatever, and say, hey, this person made this list. And then even if only 5 of them end up sharing that list, 5 of the 50, they're going to help get your list in front of way more people, which is just going to make you more visible as a byproduct. Yeah. Awesome. So I guess I wanted to look at the other side of the table, Brittany. We're talking all about building influencers, becoming an influencer. But if I am a brand looking to use an influencer, obviously I can just throw heaps of money at someone, and it may just end up being a money pit and nothing may come of that. What are some of the things that I might need to think about from the perspective of getting value for money when I am using an influencer?
Sure. So I think the number one thing brands have to remember, one, is that they're not making an advertisement. So that's what ends up happening a lot when brands are not willing to let go of control, but think they need to use an influencer, is that the influencer knows what works for their audience. So it might be a certain tone of voice, certain words that they use, the fact that they use a lot of emojis, colors, all of these things. And then the brand comes in and they pick this influencer and they start changing everything that makes the influencer resonate with her audience. And then what you end up with is an ad that performs terribly. And this has happened to me quite a few times, where you tell the brand, she wouldn't say that, she wouldn't do it that way, she wouldn't use that. Like, you try to walk them through it, but at the end of the day, they're the ones spending the money and they're going to do what they want to do. And then you end up with content that the audience is like, they obviously paid you to say that because you don't talk like that. You don't use this sort of product. We've been following you for 10 years. We know you better than you know yourself. And so, that's one of the things. I think if you're a brand and you're not ready to let go and let someone else create content around your brand, you probably aren't ready for influencer marketing yet. The other thing is that the influencer is not always her audience. And so, you see a lot of influencers who are 25 and gorgeous and have like amazing closets and wear these great clothes. But when you look at their audience is, 18 to 24. And if you're, the influencer might wear a $12,000 watch, but the odds that her audience wears a 12, almost zero. And so if you hire her to promote that, it falls completely flat once it hits the audience. And then they wonder like why there wasn't an increase in sales, where an influencer who's more of a businesswoman and maybe she's 35 and she's not, laying on these gorgeous beaches in Santorini in like a bathing suit. She's more talking about luggage and traveling and, the fact that her phone saves her life, but her audience is, 25 to 45 and has disposable income. That's probably your influencer, and she's going to be the one who moves the product for you. So I think lots of times brands get really caught up in who the influencer is, and they don't pay enough attention to who the audience is. And that's much more important. And then just, third, realizing that good content costs money. And lots of times brands really don't want to pay influencers what they're worth. And when you think about it, to hire a creative agency to create some of the same content would cost you tens of thousands of dollars and with no distribution. And you can hire an influencer for way less than that, plus get the distribution. And, you know, the content goes out to her audience who trusts her and then will make a purchase. And they don't think of it in that way. And they really should, because influencer marketing, while there is some price inflation, and as there are more influencers, the prices probably will go down. It's still like the best bang for your buck in marketing, because you get the content, you get the audience. And lots of times these influencers have really great facial recognition. So if you put their content on your site or in the store, people will do a double take because they know who that person is. And now she's permanently associated with your brand. And that's worth a lot more than I think brands give it credit for. Yeah,
could not agree more. And it's funny. I think a lot of people just think it's just about throwing money at an influencer, and you know, it becomes an advertisement more than anything else. And I think that tends to fall flat. It's funny. Rand Fishkin of Moz, he had a recent tweet which said something along the lines of, in 2012, influencer marketing meant discover the sources that influence your audience and do marketing in those places. And in 2018, influencer marketing has come to mean pay half-naked people on Instagram $500 to pose with your product. I mean, that's a gross simplification, but what do you think?
But I think that's kind of accurate.
Yeah,
you know, it's funny, but it really is. You know, you have brands are diverging. They either are really getting it and paying top dollar for best content creators, or they're just trying to figure out how can we do this trend without really, you know, putting much thought into it. And that is where you have the other type of influencer who I didn't even address in my book because it still baffles me, but like the Instagram model who, you know, they just, like you said, they have half naked photos on Instagram, and some of them have millions of followers. And they don't actually do anything. No. They don't create editorial calendars. They don't do photo shoots. They're not, you know, testing out the best products and letting you know which ones you should spend your money on. No. They really just are taking iPhone photos in their kitchen and posting them on Instagram. Yeah. And brands are paying them $500 for hair gummies and tummy teas and all these other things. But, you know, I just look at those really remind me of commercials that are really well executed. And those are, you know, great content creators. And then there are infomercials that like the volume is really loud and the quality is bad, but it's still something that you're, and it still might be and so that's that's how I think of them. And, you know, if that works for your brand, it works for your brand. Plenty of people, you know, don't need a standard commercial, and infomercial is good enough. So the same thing, same concept in influence.
Makes sense. And I guess, you know, on that topic, you have armies of girls out there making a lot of money and growing huge followings simply by taking iPhone photos of their booties. Not that I'm following those accounts, of course.
This is the sort of thing that marketers go where the eyeballs are. And if that's where the eyeballs are, then that's where they're going. And, you know, if you're trying to reach a particular audience, like if you're a beer company or a car company or something like that, and you want to reach someone who likes that sort of content, probably males within a certain, you know, age demographic, those are the type of people you're going to go to because, you know, that's who's following them. And it's a crazy kind of marketing, but it's no different than, you know, Paris Hilton eating a cheeseburger while washing a car, like these, and Jessica Simpson doing the same thing. You know, this is that same kind of marketing. It's just on a different platform. And, you know, using bikini babes to sell a product is not new in advertising at all. And it's not new on Instagram. It's just a little disappointing when you have people who are working so hard to create content and they're like, I can't get past 100,000 followers. And you have these girls who aren't doing anything and they have millions. And so, you know, it's really frustrating, but that's why at the end of the day, you can't compare yourself to other influencers on Instagram. You're in a race with yourself. And so you just have to figure out what you're doing, set your own goals, and are you on track to meet your goals? Not how is your influencer career progressing in comparison to someone else's, especially when that person is not even remotely similar to you,
Yeah.
like these Instagram models.
And just on that, comparison is the thief of joy, and social media has made it so much easier for people to just compare themselves. And oftentimes they're comparing themselves with someone's highlights rather than their lowlights that don't make the online realm. Now, I guess I just wanted to quickly explore what I call, the dark side of social media and trying to become an influencer, just around the narrative in the tech scene today around people becoming addicted to their phones, addicted to social media, the little dopamine hit you get every time you check Instagram. Oh, I got 5 more likes. Oh, I got 50 more likes. Oh, I got 100 more likes, that kind of thing. And then I guess there is a tendency for people to get, one, addicted, but then two, identify a little bit too closely perhaps with their online persona, sometimes at the expense of their real world persona. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And what have you seen influencers do in this space to navigate that delicate balance?
It's tough. There are plenty of influencers who, I follow them on Instagram, then I've met them in real life, and I'm blown away that they're completely different people. Like they're not as funny, or they're not as nice, or they're not as charming, because they really do have an online persona. And I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing if you're aware of it and you admit to it, because plenty of celebrities have alter egos that go out on stage, and then, when they're home in their pajamas with their, family and their cat, they're very different. And so I think we have to allow influencers to have a little bit of that, a little bit of that stage presence that's a little different than their real world presence, as long as they admit to it. And, it's difficult too, comparing yourself to someone when, you take a photo of yourself, you're taking one photo, you don't have professional hair and makeup, you don't, it hasn't been edited and filtered. And before an influencer posts something, she probably took 300 photos and her hair and makeup were done. And she spent hours picking an outfit and scouting the location and doing the lighting. And then she's, editing the photo. Like, it's the same as when you look at a magazine, that so much work goes into creating this photo that you really shouldn't feel like you're comparing yourself to this person, because your photo, the type of photo you take and the type of photo they take are not the same. And I think, Instagram before stories, it was really tough with that. YouTube is very different, because YouTube is very candid, and you can edit a video but so much, because it's a video and you're talking and waving your hands around and people can see every little edit that you do, where an Instagram photo is just a final photo and here is the product. And then with the introduction of stories, I think you started to see influencers be a little more real and show you the behind the scenes. Yeah. And, you can see, like, they'll tell you, like, this is the photo, but this is me trying to get the photo, and they're getting blown down the street, or they're, out in a pool and it's freezing. And, you get to see all of the crazy stuff that doesn't come across in the photo. And I think that's really healthy. And I really like influencers who show you, like, this is not perfect. Like, this is something that I'm creating for you to enjoy. But keep in mind that I'm making something. Like, I didn't wake up like this. This isn't one photo. We didn't get this on the first take. Like, this is hours and hours of work to bring you this one Instagram photo that maybe you double tap and maybe don't. And so, I think people just have to remember that. And it's tough, because I think there's some study that says, like, suicide amongst girls has gone up 70%. Yeah, because they're on Instagram and waiting for people to like their photos. And it's sad. It's sad. And, I don't think you can blame Instagram or blame influencers. I think, people just need to understand that their paths are different. And they also need to know anybody with hair, makeup, and a good photographer probably could be an influencer. Like, there are some people who are extremely talented, but lots of these people could be interchanged with someone else with the same effect. Yeah. And so I think, those are things people need to remember. Like, oh, if I had all of that stuff, I could probably take a picture like that too. And the odds that you could are very, very high. So people need to just remember that Instagram is make-believe. It really is. And I've been on sets, and I see the influencers and I see the models and the celebrities when they show up. And then I see the photos that get published, and it's completely different. It's totally different. Yeah. And if you didn't do better, I wouldn't even know it was the same person.
Yeah, yeah. And that's so important to remember. And, you hit the nail on the head with the suicide stats. And I think there was a journal that was published recently in depression and anxiety, which found that for every 10% rise in negative social media interactions a person experiences, the risk of depression rose significantly by something like 20%. But on the other side, if they have a positive social media experience, then their risk of depression falls by, I think it was 5%. But ultimately, it's on us how we choose to interpret and what we see on social media, like acknowledging that, hey, they've got hair and makeup and they probably took the photo 75 times and they've got filters on it. And ultimately this person is just putting their best foot forward. And this isn't their entire life. It's make believe. Like we're not seeing, this photo was taken. It took a split second to take this photo. We're not seeing the other 23 hours and 59 minutes of the day. And we're not seeing this person on the toilet. We're not seeing them depressed on the couch when their boyfriend broke up with them and they've got their Kleenex out and all that sort of stuff. I mean, we all have those lows, and it's important to just remember that and take ownership for how we respond to our social media experiences.
Absolutely. It's they're people just like everybody else. Like that's why, like all these tabloids, they have like stars. They're just like us. Here's so-and-so getting a banana. And it's like influencers are the same thing. They spend a lot of money to take really great Instagram pictures. So brands will give them a lot of money so they can spend that money on taking really great Instagram pictures. So they're trapped in their own cycle. They're playing an entirely different game. And, being an influencer is not like being a basketball star where unless you were born very tall or with a very, large arm span, there's no shot at you playing basketball. No, everybody's got a pretty decent shot at being an influencer as long as you're interesting enough and your content's good enough and you put in the hours. And so, this is not something people shouldn't look at it as something that's so unobtainable or these girls are like these mythical beings, because it's not true. They're people who work really hard to make this content. And that's why they end up being successful with some luck, because they definitely have to get lucky at some point, because that's how the first brand finds you. That's how you break 100,000. That's how you get on BuzzFeed, like all of these things. It's hard work, but there's a lot of luck. And, if you put in the hours, at some point, hopefully you'll get lucky.
Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely loved your basketball analogy, Brittany, as someone who won the MVP award in his local under 14s basketball tournament and then stopped growing at the height of 5'9". I totally understand. Resonates with me. So we've covered a hell of a lot and we are just about out of time. But before we wrap up, I'd just love to know a little bit more about what you do to stay on top of your game, Brittany. I mean, like we said at the start of the show, you're juggling a few different businesses, co-founder at Carbon, working at Hearst, writing books, appearing on podcasts. I mean, what do you do you're also a mother as well. You're picking your son up from school just after this show, so we'll wrap this one up shortly. But what do you do to stay on top of your game, Brittany? How do you approach every day to get the most out of it?
I think part of it is you have to write down what you'd like to get done today, because if you don't, you will forget. I stopped writing things down for a short amount of time and realized I was much less productive, so just and setting goals and then figuring out like, what are you going to do to accomplish them? And then like actually getting there. People like to say to me a lot, like, oh, you're so lucky. And it's like a lot of this, there is of course, a lot of luck, which I keep saying, but so much of it was like strategy. Like I knew I wanted to write a book. And so to have the experience necessary to write that book, I needed to have a lot of experience with brands and influencers, which is why I went after and got the job at Hearst, and just making sure you have a really good support network, because this book would not have been written without my husband constantly pushing me to write it. It was like, you said you're going to write it. Well, where is it? And, lots of times you need to have people hold you accountable, because that's really how work gets done. So writing everything down, thinking about the long-term strategy and what do I need to get there, and having someone push me over the finish line. I think those are the three main things that people definitely need if they want to be successful at one thing, let alone multiple things.
Beautifully said. And luck is really just the intersection of opportunity and preparation. And, the opportunity might appear, but unless you're prepared, unless you did the work, then you won't be able to take advantage. So very well said. People can find out more about the book over at influencerthebook.com. They can obviously pick up a copy on Amazon. They can find out more about you at BrittanyHennessy.com and connect with you on Twitter at 2legit2brit. Actually, I haven't got your Instagram. What's your Instagram? Shall we share that with our audience?
Sure. It's Mrs. Brittany Hennesy, and that's where I spend most of my time on Instagram.
Okay, well, I would imagine that would be the case. I will add that to the show notes for our listeners. Thanks so much, Brittany, for your time today. You've been an awesome guest, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Steve again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that I'm publishing on a regular basis, just leave your details at futuresquared.xyz/subscribe and you'll receive the very next one. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, take a minute to like, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It goes a long way to giving the podcast the exposure it needs so I can continue bringing you guests and conversations of the highest caliber. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Gwibeski and on Instagram at TheSteveGwibeski. Until next time.
Hasta la vista, baby.